Sweet Tooth is a new show to have debuted on Netflix recently based off the Vertigo comic series of the same name, written and drawn mostly by Jeff Lemire. Today's video is going to cover the main character and history of Sweet Tooth, otherwise known as Gus. But before we begin, keep in mind that this video is not going to cover every single issue, conversation, or action that Sweet Tooth takes, but it will cover the vast majority of the most important elements of his story. Gus's first appearance is, not too shockingly, in Sweet Tooth number 1. Gus is a young boy living in the woods with his father, who's not given a name but referred to simply as Papa by Gus. The world of Sweet Tooth establishes a few things that you need to know right off the bat. First and foremost, 99% of the population has been wiped out by a horrible virus that kills fairly indiscriminately. Sometimes the virus kills slowly and sometimes quickly. However, one thing is certain: if you contract the virus, you die. Around the same time the virus strikes, humanity notices that all of the children being born after the outbreak seem to be deformed, resembling animals. These children are called hybrids. Gus is a 9-year-old boy with features similar to that of a deer, and for the first 9 years of his life, Gus lives alone in a cabin in the woods with his father, a God-fearing man who desperately wants to keep Gus hidden away from the ruthlessness that has taken over the planet in the wake of the outbreak. In fact, Gus has never seen another human except for his father. Gus's mother passed away before he was born, and his father spends his days teaching Gus how to fend for himself while reciting weird scripture that he writes in the vein of the Christian Bible. However, slowly but surely it becomes evident that Gus's father is sick with the virus and he is going to die. He eventually passes away and Gus is left to fend for himself. Not long after Gus buries his father, 2 hunters kill a deer near their grave, and after observing Gus, decide that due to his age, they want to take him in for a reward. Unfortunately for the hunters, they catch particularly nasty cases of bullet to the head and head smashed into tree, which are very difficult diseases to cure. The man who inflicts said illnesses upon the hunter is a man named Tommy Jeopard. He's an old retired hockey player who, much like everybody else, is simply trying to make his way through the world. Gus latches onto Jeopard and Jeopard asks him how old he is, which he replies 9, confusing Jeopard as the sickness and subsequent hybrids didn't start showing up until about 7 years ago, which indicates that either Gus doesn't know his own age or that Gus was around before the sickness hit, a topic we will discuss later. Despite initial hesitation to leave his home, Gus does eventually decide to leave with Jeopard and go out into the world, which I'm sure is going to be fine and won't have anything terrible happen at all. Jeopard promises to take Gus to a place called the Preserve, a place where hybrid children are protected. Along the way, Jeopard gives Gus a candy bar, which he eats hastily, earning the nickname Sweet Tooth, something that Jeopard calls him pretty much the rest of the series. Gus travels with Jeopard and the two are attacked by members of the Animal Army, essentially a group of road bandits. Jeopard is wounded badly and Sweet Tooth nurses him back to health and they continue their trip. The next stop is when they find a group of women that are being pimped out by a local pig named Jacob and his wife. When Jeopard determines that the group is of no threat to them, he decides to leave, much to Gus's disagreement, fearing for the young girls being abused. Sweet Tooth pleads for Jeopard to help, and he does. He goes back inside and removes Jacob from the burden of existence. He kills him, sorry. Anyway, he leaves one of the women, Lucy, in charge, who kills the wife, and Jeopard and Gus leave. Gus and Jeopard arrive at the preserve and meet a man named General Abbott. Abbott functions as the series' main villain. Jeopard, however, shockingly gives Sweet Tooth to Abbott in exchange for a duffel bag. Jeopard, ashamed, leaves with the duffel bag that Abbott has given him, as whatever's inside is near and dear enough to Jeopard to make him abandon Gus. We later learn that the contents of the bag were the remains of Jeopard's wife, a story I will cover in greater detail in his video if there is enough demand for it. However, for the time being, just know that Jeopard and his wife were once saved by Abbott in the wild and led to believe that they would be taken care of by Abbott at the preserve. Instead, they were imprisoned and his wife died in childbirth at the facility. Jeopard is exiled from the preserve and given an ultimatum. He would receive his wife's remains back if he could bring Abbott a live specimen to experiment on. Now, since this video is about Gus, I'm only going to include the elements of Jeopard's story that are 100% required, so keep in mind there's a fair bit of narrative that I'm leaving out, as Jeopard goes on a fairly lengthy solo adventure amassing his own army before he meets back up with Gus later in the series. Gus, in the bowels of the preserve, meets a number of characters that go on to be his friends for the remainder of the series. Wendy is a pig-child hybrid, Bobby is a hybrid with a gopher, and a silent deer hybrid named Buddy, and a few other unnamed animal hybrids. They also meet a disillusioned scientist named Dr. Singh, who is trying unsuccessfully to cure the virus by experimenting on hybrid children. Singh believes the children are linked directly to the virus as they only began appearing after the virus began to strike. Periodically, troops would come in and take away a child, and it would never return. One day, troops come and they drug Gus and take him to see Dr. Singh, and after a very brief getting to know you session, there starts to become questions about Gus's origin, his father, and questions about his parents and parts of his early childhood. It's also determined at this time, due to a lack of belly button like every other hybrid kid has, Gus has no one, indicating that there was some element of mystery to how he may have been conceived. Abbott gets frustrated that Singh is making little progress and threatens both Singh and Gus. In turn, Singh decides to hypnotize Gus in an effort to learn more about his past that he may have forgotten. During the session, we learn that Gus's father kept a catalog of his life before and during the earliest days of the virus outbreak, and it slowly morphed into this really creepy Bible that he wrote in isolation that was kind of induced by his paranoia and led him to believe that he was this new prophet of the world. Additionally, they are able to determine that Gus came from Nebraska, and they plan to go there to search for more information about Gus as an oddity. Gus is returned to the kennels and his friends Wendy and Bobby. Abbott's brother Johnny is in charge of the kennels, but over time he grows to care for the children, and after watching Gus be assaulted for literally no reason by guards, decides to help them all escape the compound. In the sewers, Wendy is attacked by a hybrid crocodile child who is just feral and hungry and unfortunately takes a bite out of Wendy's arm. Gus goes full Mar from Home Alone 2 and beats the crocodile kid to death with a brick.
Suck brick, kid!
Now free, Gus begins to travel back to his home in Nebraska, and he promises to keep the rest of the group safe in the home that he grew up in. Meanwhile, Abbott and Singh have actually found Gus's childhood home, and they are going through the family's things left behind. Singh has the body of Gus's father exhumed after reading some of his creepy Bible he had written and found an interesting passage indicating more clues to Gus's origin may be buried on the compound. Near where Gus's father's body is buried, a metal box is found filled with additional trinkets and clues related to Gus's biological origins. We learn that the man claiming to be Gus's father was actually named Richard Fox and worked on a military base in Alaska. Having what they came for, Abbott and Singh burn the home and leave the scene. While all of this is going on, Jeopard slowly starts working his way back to the preserve, determined to free Sweet Tooth and right the wrong that he committed by leaving him there in the first place. Jeopard amasses a literal army of unlikely allies while he's gone, including a militia called the Animal Armies led by a man named Glibhelm that we discussed earlier, Glibhelm's hybrid dog children, and two women they freed earlier, Lucy and Becky. Meanwhile, Abbott's troops were able to easily hunt down and recapture the children whom had escaped. Abbott begins to interrogate Gus about how they escaped and where his brother Johnny was before the entire army that Jeopard has amassed descends upon the compound and frees the children. During the confrontation between Jeopard and Abbott, we learn that Jeopard had a son, and that son was believed to be dead. But, shockingly, he is alive, and Abbott uses him as a bargaining chip. This momentary lapse gives Abbott enough time to knife Jeopard in the stomach, but Johnny returns to defend Jeopard, blowing off Abbott's fingers on his left hand with a shotgun by accident. All of the hybrid children are found by Lucy and Becky, being held by Singh, who is trying to protect them from the rest of Glibhelm's army. Jeopard tries to save all of the children, but the hybrid dogs have Buddy and won't let go. Jeopard decides to leave Buddy as the risk doesn't outweigh the reward until Buddy yells "Dad" to Jeopard, indicating that Buddy was actually Jeopard's son who survived childbirth and was raised in the preserve. Abbott arrives before the dogs can kill Buddy and instead kills Glibhelm and assumes command over what's left of his troops, the animal armies, and the dogs. Gus and what remains of the group convene and decide that the most likely place to get answers about what led to the virus that overtook the planet, as well as Gus's true origins, would be to travel to Alaska and find the base that Gus's father, Richard Fox, worked on. Gus and Jeopard barely speak as their relationship is extremely taxed due to, Jeopard being an asshole and leaving him with Abbott in the first place. The group briefly finds shelter at an abandoned mall and then continue north. However, before long, the group is split into multiple subgroups. Gus and Jeopard go out hunting, Wendy, Lucy, and Becky go out scouting the area, and Sing, Johnny, and Bobby stay at the camp to guard it. The girls don't make it too far before they're accidentally ensnared in a net. They are approached by a man appearing to be handicapped and calling himself Walter Fish. Look at this asshole. Don't trust this guy. He's a jerk. He invites them to a place called the Sanctuary, a converted old hydroelectric dam that has everything you need for survival: food, water, electricity, medicine, everything. The facility was completed by a group called Project Evergreen who had gone mysteriously missing, leaving everything as it was and ready to use. Walter also tells him that a man named Haggerty was trying with a group of small militia to get access to the sanctuary, hence the traps in the woods. After a brief encounter with a bear, Jeopard and Gus find their way to the sanctuary and demand to be let in to save the girls who they believe are in trouble. However, Jeopard finds them in perfect health and Walter acting as a perfect host, something uncommon in this world. Look at this little shit, you lying shit, I hate you so much. Anyway, Jeopard, despite not being treated unfairly by Walter, grows to distrust him. He continues to monitor Walter, never truly believing that he isn't a threat. When Walter hears that there are others out in the woods, he helps launch a retrieval party, hoping to get to the others before Haggerty's men do. However, Haggerty's men find the others first, and a battle ensues that sees Jeopard save the group, or so they think. The group all return to the sanctuary, and life continues, with Jeopard and Lucy slowly starting to fall in love. The kids have fun playing with each other, and the rest of the group settles in until one night Gus and Jeopard go out to get firewood. And during this trip, Gus is shot in the stomach, and the shots continue to rain at Jeopard. Jeopard brings the two of them back to the sanctuary, where he confronts Walter outside, believing him to be the shooter. The group nurses Sweet Tooth back to health, and in the wake of the attack by the mysterious shooter, the group divides after Jeopard assaults Walter, believing that he was the one to commit the assault. But before Jeopard leaves, he and Sing agree that Jeopard will return and retrieve Gus when he's fully healed so that they can all continue on their quest to Alaska. Alright, at this point in the video, we're taking a brief detour. You can consider this kind of like an intermission. I'm going to start the process of systematically explaining the entire history of the virus, hybrid children, and the story of how the virus came to destroy everything. The series takes a 3-issue break at this point and tells a side story within this world. A couple of hundred years back, a Dr. James Thacker, a taxidermist, hires a team of sailors and attempts to travel from England to Alaska in order to retrieve his soon-to-be brother-in-law Lewis Simpson. Lewis had taken a missionary trip before his wedding to Thacker's sister, and he went to Alaska in order to bring religion to the savages that lived there, but he never returned. When James arrives in Alaska, they find that most of the people in the mission had died of a virus as they attempted to build a church. The group soon comes to blows with the local Eskimo, and shockingly, Lewis, who has now come to live with the Eskimo people. Lewis became enamored with the Eskimo people and grew to fall in love with their ways and customs. Lewis also fell in love with a local Eskimo woman whom he impregnated and decided to stay and live with the tribe. And I know what you're all thinking, we've all seen Dances with Wolves, right? Same exact thing, except with Eskimo. Lewis tells them the story that one day while out hunting, he came to find a massive cave with what appeared to be tombs. He opened a coffin with a deer on it to see the skeleton of a humanoid deer hybrid. Lewis is quickly removed from the cave by other tribesmen, and he learns back at their camp that he had unwittingly opened the tomb of Tekit Sertok. and learn that Tukjet was actually the god of land, deer, and the northern sky, and that he had been angered by him opening his tomb. However, despite the warning, things remained the same as ever until his son was born. Slowly, the missionaries and the other Eskimo began to die of a strange sickness. Lewis's son was born a hybrid, much like Gus, and as soon as he was born, it was determined that he was a reincarnated Tukjet and that the virus was he, a god, coming back to reclaim Earth. Lewis planned to let the baby return and take back the Earth, but instead, James and the other English soldiers kill all of the Eskimo people, return the baby to the tomb, and take Lewis back to the ship. However, they all die of the virus along the way, and Thacker's notes and all of the events are left near the boat. Alright, so that was it for the brief intermission story, and I feel like that story had a little bit of everything. It had dances with Eskimos, baby murder, a lot of fun topics. So let's go ahead and get back to the main timeline. Back in the main timeline, about a month has passed, and Gus and Sing reunite after Gus is healed. The group back at the sanctuary remains, however, Lucy has started to show signs of the disease. Jeopard, Gus, and Sing continue to work their way to Alaska, but they need transportation. They decide to try and see if they can salvage transportation from Haggerty's men. Jeopard comes across a gas station and opens fire on one of the men that's there, who turns out to be part of Project Evergreen. In a twist you should have expected because I've been hinting at it all along, it turns out that Walter is really Haggerty, a conman and sexual predator who had infiltrated Project Evergreen and locked everyone out of the establishment except for the real Walter Fish's wife and daughter, who he assaulted and killed. Jeopard leaves Gus and Sing and goes back to save the girls, but gets in a car crash along the way and is saved by an old hockey buddy of his who he hadn't seen in years named Jimmy Jacobs, who also happened to be surviving out in the local wilderness. Sing tries to kidnap Gus in order to continue on the trip to Alaska, but Gus is able to break free and returns to the sanctuary to help the girls, Bobby and Johnny. The group attempts to save the girls from Haggerty, but end up being chased by him throughout the compound. Haggerty falls and breaks his leg during the chase, and Lucy and the group get the upper hand. Instead of killing him, Gus makes the group let him go outside of the compound where he freezes to death. Jeopard and Tommy arrive in order to save the group, but find them essentially out of harm's way already. However, Lucy dies of the disease just as they return. The majority of the group reconnect after Lucy's passing, and they all collectively find their way to Alaska in pursuit by Abbott, who tortures their location out of Bobby, who was left behind to hibernate at the compound. Sing also makes his way to Alaska by himself in search for answers and gets there a good bit of time before the rest of the group. When the rest of everybody else arrives in Alaska, shit kinda goes bananas. They first encounter a group of animal hybrids, the same gods shown earlier in the backstory about the Alaskan expedition gone wrong, and they also find Sing, who goes on to tell them that he found the animal hybrids under the base nearby and went on to learn the truth. These beings once existed before mankind, but they were killed off. The notes of the Alaskan expedition were found, and they were used to hunt down the location of the tombs discussed before. From there, humans genetically recreated and cloned these beings. Gus was the first of these beings to be cloned, but with his birth came a resurgence of the virus. The virus killed off the people at the compound and began to spread throughout the world. The man Gus believed was his father was a man named Richard Fox, who was a janitor working at the base. When his wife, who was pregnant, miscarried, Richard used the cover of the virus outbreak to steal Gus from the lab. However, Richard's wife died of the virus before he returned, and instead he fled to Nebraska. It was here he raised Gus alone for 9 years. Bobby returns to the compound with a warning to the group that Abbott was coming. Jeopard sends everybody except him and Jimmy back to the fort in order to hold up and defend it. Jeopard and Jimmy launch an attack on the oncoming forces that's fairly successful. However, they are outsmarted by Abbott, who's able to infiltrate the base and kidnap the others, while Jeopard and Jimmy learn that they were essentially fighting a diversionary force. In the process, Jimmy dies. Abbott and Jeopard come face to face, and Abbott's forces are attacked by the other godlings, determined to save Gus as one of their own. Jeopard is hurt by the hybrid dog children, and Abbott flees with Buddy, Jeopard's son, into the base. Jeopard hunts them down and fights Abbott but is soon overpowered. Abbott goes to kill him but is stabbed to death by Gus, who had snuck up behind him during the fight. Jeopard asks Gus to look after Buddy and passes away. The book's final issue goes many years into the future. Gus is now the leader of the hybrid animal civilization and has 2 sons with Wendy, little Tommy and Richard. Mankind still attempts to hunt and kill hybrids, but Gus has formed a strong community and humanity's numbers are growing very thin. We learned a lot about the future. Sing survives and lives in the hybrid community, so does Bobby, Wendy, Buddy, and many of the other hybrids. Together, Gus and Buddy fight a final war against the last forces of men, still trying to kill the hybrids off. The hybrids win, and the last humans live among them as friends until they die of old age or the virus that still affects them. The hybrids live a life of peace for many decades. They explore the world and begin to build their own new one. They find other hybrid animal communities and band together, and as time progresses, they thrive, inheriting the world. Gus passes away as an old man in his home, having found peace in his life. And that is pretty much it for the comic book history of Gus, aka Sweet Tooth. I hope you learned a lot, and if you did, consider liking and subscribing. This has been Nick with Key Issues, and remember the motto, Sweet Tooth over everything.